Hi, my name is Hamid Sharif. I lived in China from 2012 onwards for about 10 years. I started there as the country director for the Asian Development Bank, and later I joined the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So my time as China was very memorable, and I started to understand China a bit better, and in that context I wanted to explain some of my views on China. And with this background, I want to explain what distinguishes Chinese leadership and China's role currently in the world from other superpowers, and what it means in particular for developing countries like Pakistan. Chinese leadership is highly technocratic. You cannot rise to be a leader in China until you have proven yourself. And usually leaders start at the bottom. So you would, if you're lucky, you start at to be a mayor of a small town, and your achievements are assessed at that level. And if you're doing well, then you rise. The other interesting thing about China is that the top leadership will define parameters very widely and give plenty of room to leaders below to respond to those parameters. And therefore, it breeds within the Chinese leadership huge incentives to be creative. So if you're a Chinese leader, you will know that at the top, a particular objective has been set and there are certain parameters around it. But there's so much room for you to experiment. So you have to take the risk of experimenting and being creative. Now, that does really carry risk, but if you get it wrong, you can be out and you can be punished. But if you get it right, then I think you can rise. So Chinese leadership in that sense is I find quite different to a lot of other systems that I've come across, and this I think is a very important feature we should remember. Secondly, the rise of China. I think the fact that China associates itself with the global South and regards itself as a developing country is very significant for countries like Pakistan. By doing that, China is really signaling that the voice of all countries, and particularly weaker developing countries, has to be also taken into account. It has to be heard in the international system. Now, this is in contrast to the Western view of international order, which, while it talks about all the great things we have in the UN Charter, but at the level of practice, or at the practical level, it sees the necessity of a superpower at the top, which brings order at the bottom. The theory seems to be that, unless you have that superpower at the top, to bring order, there would be chaos. I think the Chinese are saying, not necessarily. That perhaps what we need is an approach to international relations which is based on mutual respect for sovereignty, which in the Chinese tradition means non-interference in the affairs of other countries, and listening to each other, working together to craft win-win solutions. That, I think, is really key. And if you start to look at Chinese-led institutions, or where China is at least a prominent player, like the BRICS, the SCO, the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, you will find that they go to great lengths to forge consensus and to forge solutions in which everybody is getting something out of it. So, eschewing the notion that there have to be winners and losers, I think China is leading the world in a way, or prompting the South to engage in international security issues, international economic issues, in which they have a voice. And I think that is quite distinct from what we've seen in the last 50, 60 years, where we've seen that despite all the talk of rule of law and all the wonderful, things about human rights and so on, but when it has come to implementation, the hypocrisy of the West, I think, today stands totally exposed. And I think in the last 3 years, the Gaza incident has affected everybody in the world, and very rightly so, and including to the great credit of people living in the West. And my hat's off to them. The number of people who have, risen against this, who have marched against this unequal treatment, this unequal treatment of Israel, and not calling out Israel for the genocide it has committed. I think this is a remarkable event. Some scholars have referred to this as an insurgent legality, where in a way non-state actors are marching against the international order and trying to set their own norms to say, if you're not going to hold Israel accountable, we will, by boycotting corporations which sell and cooperate with Israel and so on. So we're living in a world in which the old international order is in a state of turmoil. And I find it very interesting and somewhat ironic that in this whole chaos and turmoil, stability is being provided by Chinese-led institutions which are talking about rule of law, which want to abide by the UN Charter, but they want to do it in a manner that it is done equitably. There are no favorites. It applies to everybody. So that, I think, is a huge contribution which I think China is making to the international order.